Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Sullivan. I was born in the Chicago area and lived there for a long time, but now I am north of Tampa, Florida. I'm here with my fellow Green from the Wild West in New Mexico, Rick Lass. Say hello, Rick.
Hi everyone, Rick Lass calling in from the Members Valley, Apache land, and really excited to talk about what we really need to do to create a real democracy in this country. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we hope that you carry this with you. And this is we're just starting this out here, but we don't want it to end here. Tonight we have three guests that each will share their perspectives on a transformational topic that could really change everything in the United States for the better. Zaki Baruti will be speaking for the Universal African Peoples Organization in Caledon. Myers from ProRep Coalition of California, and Lynn Serpy, International Electoral Reform Campaigner. And I've been and she has quite an extensive list, which I will get to when I introduce her again. But I've been quite interested in elections since 1968 when I was 15 and too young to vote. But I wanted Senator Eugene McCarthy, the peace candidate for president. And so I actually went to both DNCs in Chicago in 68 and then last year. But anyway, election reform is it's a baffling list. I mean, there's so many things. The money spent on elections is atrocious. Each state ballot access it's formidable, at least in most states anyway. The electoral college is stupid. So we should have ranked choice voting, and there's plenty to fix. But in the election of 2024, it really hit me that when my candidate, Jill Stein, came in third place, even though she got more votes than four states have populations, Greens get zero say. And, not to mention all the other parties, that are out there, all the other people. And then, the libertarians, they came in, people that were voting, I don't know why, still voting for RFK when he dropped out. But I mean, we all lost our say. 90 million people didn't even bother to vote. So they lost their say. But I think the reason they aren't voting is at least half of them are probably just, I don't know who we can vote for. My candidate was taken off the ballot, or, we don't like any of the candidates that we know of. We don't hear about anybody different than the two parties. So anyway, but we get this zero say. So our votes are suppressed. In North Dakota, Vermont, Alaska, and Wyoming, they each get 2 U.S. senators and a representative in the U.S. House, even though they have less population than the people that voted for Jill Stein, for instance. So, and you could grab a calculator, just write this down. Write down the population of our smallest populated state, Wyoming, which is 586,485 people. Well, I took that number and I divided it into our largest state, which is California. And I came up with California is equal to 66 Wyoming. So you can do it either way. Take 66 times 586 and 485. Or you can go to California's population, which is 38,889,800 people, and divide it by Wyoming's 586,485. So I mean, it's just crazy. I kept thinking, am I right? But it's true. And then I did it with the second largest state, Texas. It's 52 Wyomings. Florida is 39 Wyomings. New York is 33 Wyomings. So our four largest states equal 190 Wyomings. So our U.S. House is frozen at 435 members. If we take those 5 states, the 4 biggest and Wyoming, that number is 191. And we take that away from 435, that leaves the rest of the 45 states in the union. They only get 5 representatives each. I mean, are you seeing how messed up this is and how limiting for democracy? In 1967, our U.S. House was frozen at 435 members. And it's been that way for 60 years. But I also saw some research where it's been that way since the Taft administration in 1910. So, which then it was more like 209,000 were representative instead of 750,000. Right now, It's our population has grown to the third largest country in the world, and we get represented by one person in DC for 750,000 people, which is more than 3 times the next democracy, which is Japan. And then Iceland, the voters have 5,500 of them represented by one congressperson, whereas we have almost 800,000 people by one representative. That's a big job for any representative. I don't care how good they are, but it just really is. Obviously, we're not getting represented. So I guess here's the thing. We are aiming for landing on Mars. We can fly to nearly every city in the world within 24 hours. We have internet that connects the whole world. And us, the United States, the most powerful country in the world, we have nuclear weapons. We can destroy the whole world. And we have billion-dollar bombers, but we just can't seem to fit any more representatives in the Capitol than 435 plus 100 senators. So instead of being able to build a new Capitol building, we do this. New York loses population to Florida, and Florida becomes the third largest state. So New York gives us 2 representatives in Florida, now we get 2 more representatives. You know, whatever juggling needs to be done to keep us unrepresented. But if we actually did the original mathematical cube rule, we would have a US House with 593 members. This is where we should be. We should have a US Capitol that can house 693 members, you know, the senators and the US congressmen, women. And yeah, we are capable of this. And it's been studied by many researchers. The New York Times, even, and Pew Research. I'm just to name a few. It's the easiest election reform there is. And first, we'll delve into why it needs to be done with Zaki, and then how it can be done with Caledon's great slideshow, and then we'll finish with Lynn Serpy, who has done it in New Zealand and Canada. So, Zaki, could you please come on and tell us what you think about how you feel about how you're represented in this country.
Okay, first of all, let me say good evening to everyone, and I really appreciate you laying out the hypocrisy of this electoral system here in the United States. First of all, for me, in terms of proportionate political representation, in the sense of on the Black side, in terms of representation and or the lack thereof. For me, our organization since 1984 has been pushing what we call proportionate political representation from this perspective. We say that as it relates to Black people, that wherever is the Black population at the national level of government, state level of government, or local levels of government, then that percentage of representation should be held by the Black population. And that came about in terms of historically for us as an organization, actually in 1984, as head of another organization that was called Caucus for Community Progress. We had put together what we call Missouri's first statewide Black People's Political Convention. And we had over a couple of hundred representatives there. And we had 3 objectives. One was to just educate Black people who were in attendance to state politics. Second was to draw up a platform of concerns impacting Black people in Missouri. And the third one was to encourage Black people to run statewide to address the lack of Black representation statewide. In 1984, out of 100 United States senators, 2 from each state, not one was Black, 0%, even though our percentage was, at that time, they say 10%. And accordingly, as I had just defined, proportionate political representation from my perspective, then at least 10 of those senators, at least 10 of the 100 senators should have been Black. When you look at the House of Representatives at that time, they only had about 7 or 8. And at that time, of course, it should have been 43. And then if you looked at the governorship, out of 50 governors, 0 were Black. So to that end, that was the purpose of our conference convention. And out of that, after trying to get the named prominent Black elected officials like state senators and state representatives to run. We couldn't get no one, and I ran as governor of the state of Missouri back in 1984, and I ran a second time in 1988, and I shocked many of the political pundits. I ran on the Democratic ticket because to be an independent at that time, and I was not aware of the Green Party, then you would have to get X amount of signatures, which would have been too massive for us. As well as I ran again for governor on the Green Party ticket in the year 2000, and at that time, the presidential candidate slipping my mind, forgive me, but that was a most diverse political ticket at that time in terms of we had both Black and white candidates on the Green Party ticket at that time. So when you look at that time too, we looked at the total number of elected officials across America was 500,000. And again, less than 2 or 3% were Black. It has increased the number of Black elected officials somewhat, but not to no degree for in this year 2025. When you look at the United States Senate today, out of 100 U.S. senators, Black representation is only 5 members. Whereas again, the U.S. Senate census is stating that Black people are at least 14% of the population. And accordingly to our theory, it should be at least then 14 Black U.S. senators. On the U.S. House of Representatives side, shockingly, there are 59 members out of the 435 in the House of Representatives, which equates almost to 13% of that number. But then if you look at the governorships in America, out of 50 today, only 1 is Black. And again, ideally on proportionate political representation from our perspective, it should be at least 7. And then a high really point of contradiction was going back to the Ferguson uprising. At the time of Mike Brown's murder in Ferguson, which was in 2014, the Black population in Ferguson was at least 68% Black. Yet you had a city council of 6 council members, along with the mayor, which made up 7 that ran the city. Only 1 was Black, and as a direct consequence of us not having our fair share, you had a police force that was came into existence under that predominantly white elected officials of 53 police officers, and only 3 were Black. And I cite that because, as we all know, politics and political office also impacts social policies as well as the economics of different communities. So, as we move forward as it relates to political parties, if a political party does not address that whole question of the lack of proportionate political power for Black people, then we say we should not be involved with them. And accordingly, more our organization many times are not involved with the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party. And we have our tendency to the Green Party because of its efforts over the years to have Black candidates and to run for critical positions. So for me and for our organization, when we talk about proportionate political representation, it has to also include the representation of Black people and brown people in proportion to their numbers. So that's our definition of proportionate representation. And we feel that overall in this system, we've been left behind and not included to the level that we should be. So that's the struggle going forward. And we challenge all political parties that if they are true to democracy, then they have to address that particular issue. So that was our position on proportionate political representation.
Okay, so what we have here is you guys are left out, and then there's other groups that are left out as well. And I think the African American community is one of the biggest, most prominent groups that has been here for a long time, way more than many of the immigrants that have come in. So, I mean, and then women as well. The women are not represented, but people of different political points of view are totally not represented. You have to pick one or the other, like vanilla or chocolate ice cream. It's like there's no other flavors, and it's really, you know, it's it's not a democracy for sure. So, I guess we're ready. If are you done with what you have to present, Zaki? Do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, no, that was my basic subject.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, that's good points. And I wish I know. I think as mayors and governors and senators, those are other things we need to get to, but the easiest one would be US representatives. And what would be wrong with having more Black representatives than just the percentage that I mean, of people? It's way for so long. But okay, so now we have Caledon Myers. And welcome. And could you give us your slideshow? Be all anxious to see that.
I would love to. And no, thank you for having me, everyone. This is my first time presenting to the Green Black Alliance. Thanks to Rick for reaching out to me, and Jennifer for hosting, and Zaki for your presentation, and Lynn for your presentation after mine. Um, so happy to be here. My name is Caledon Myers. I'm the founder and executive director of ProRep Coalition. ProRep Coalition is a nonprofit with a mission to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. So although ProRep is focused on California, the point of this presentation is discuss what proportional representation, or PR, is in a general sense. So the first portion of this presentation, I'll discuss PR nationally as applied to Congress. And we'll share a little bit more about our efforts in California towards the end. And although I am going to be really focusing on California, there are a few things that we're working on in our state that could be replicated in other states as well. So I want to start by talking about parties, political parties. Now, within at least the electoral reform community, and even among a lot of members of the public, there's a general disdain for political parties, right? People don't like them. They're divisive, polarizing, they prevent things from getting done. But I'm here today, and I'd like to convince you that parties are vital institutions of representation, and that the single biggest problem with American politics today isn't that we have parties, it's that we only have two. And to demonstrate that point, I want to do a little thought experiment. So just let's consider November's election. I want everyone to picture the candidates that were running for president. Who were they? What are their names? You guys probably know them. Okay, now picture the candidates that ran for Congress in the district you live in. Who are they? What were their platforms? What were their names? Now, let's go one level deeper to your state assembly. Who represents you in your state assembly now? Who is your state assembly person? How long have they been in office for? What have they accomplished? And who, if anyone, challenged them last election? If you're like the vast majority of Americans, you probably found those questions pretty difficult to answer, especially those about the state assembly or state senate representatives. But now let me ask just a slightly different set of questions. What party did you vote for in the last congressional election? What party did you vote for in the last state assembly election? And just what party do you typically vote for? It's a bit easier, right? And the point here is this: candidates come and go, parties remain. As voters, especially in down ballot non-presidential elections like for state assembly or state senate, we use parties to learn which candidates we align with the most. So they're the foundations of representation in our representative democracy. And like them or not, we need political parties. There isn't a single advanced democracy in the world today that doesn't rely on political parties to translate the will of the people into the law of the land. And yet, when thinking about America's two-party system, it's difficult to not feel like things are severely broken. So why are politics today so dysfunctional? Over the last few decades in the United States, our political parties have become fully polarized. They consistently vote along party lines and rarely function in a bipartisan manner. With only two fully polarized parties to choose from, and thus only two political vehicles for voters to organize themselves, American politics are zero sum. Representation for one group comes at the direct expense of the other. That means without the opportunity for bipartisan support, the policies created by the party in power are often viewed as harming the interests of the party out of power. This has increased political division, resulted in escalating political violence, and as demonstrated in these graphs, eroded partisans' perceptions of one another. When it comes to politics, Americans are losing our ability to cooperate with one another. Our two-party system is tearing us apart. And this isn't new. See, even though partisan polarization has become more visible over the last few decades, the two parties have been gradually drifting apart for almost 75 years now. So, for example, the center image shows elected lawmakers' tendencies to vote on bipartisan legislation. In 1951, our representatives used to work together to enact policies. Democrats would support Republican bills they believed in, and vice versa. Fast forward to 2011, which is when this was last put together, but I think would be much worse now. But in 2011, we can see that maybe a dozen lawmakers actually crossed the political aisle to support legislation championed by the other party. The two parties have nearly completely diverged, and the opportunity for collaboration and compromise is virtually non-existent. Why? The doom loop. As the two parties continue to diverge, the stakes of our politics start to feel higher and more emotional, which results in the two parties seeing each other as existential threats, leading to the creation of bubbles and echo chambers wherein the other side is totally cut off, leaving us with a toxic zero-sum us versus them political culture that leads to just conflict, gridlock, and dysfunction. It's for this reason that without major change, things are probably going to get a lot worse before they get better. And this dysfunction is not lost on voters. A record low percentage of Americans, 28%, are satisfied with how democracy is working. So where do we go from here? Do we move away from democracy and towards a more authoritarian form of government, or do we fight to improve and reform our democracy? Reflecting on our latest election, both parties' campaign rhetoric that democracy was on the ballot and the fate of our country is at stake, both were right. But the solution out of our country's crisis of democracy isn't one party beating the other. It's changing the system that fosters such toxic binary thinking. So we're caught in this two-party doom loop because we only have two parties. Why do we only have two parties? We have two parties because of our electoral system. Okay, what are electoral systems? Everyone here is probably familiar with America's key democratic institutions. We have three branches of government: the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. We have a separation of powers, a constitution, a Bill of Rights, bicameral legislature. But what's equally, if not more important than all of these, is a hidden institution that was put in place during our country's founding, and it hasn't changed since. It's our electoral system. Electoral systems are the rules that govern our elections and, in particular, determine how votes are translated into seats. Generally speaking, there are two types of electoral systems that most of the world's advanced democracies use to elect their legislatures. Winner-take-all systems, which tend to produce legislatures dominated by two major parties, and proportional representation, which produce multi-party legislatures. In the United States, as you all know, we use a winner-take-all system. The person who gets the most votes wins. That's how our winner-take-all system works. And if you've spent all of your life in the US, you probably think that's the only logical way for elections to work. That's not true, as we'll elaborate on later. But the key mechanism within winner-take-all systems that results in two-party politics is the use of single-member districts. See, technically, we do have a multi-party system, as you all know. There are plenty of green, libertarian, and other alternative parties that are constantly competing in elections. However, their ability to actually win is rendered nearly impossible due to the arena they're competing in, the single-member district. With single-member districts, since there's only one seat up for grabs in an election, a single winner, and the only way to win is to simply get the most votes, then any third party trying to earn representation will take votes away from the side closest to it. It's called the spoiler effect. This type of electoral system creates a political climate that discourages voters from selecting candidates they genuinely prefer. Instead, voters are forced to settle for candidates from the major parties they feel are most likely to win, the lesser of two evils. In turn, political diversity is forced into a left and right partisan binary, leaving voters with only two ways of expressing their political preferences. Aside from the lack of choice for voters, using winner-take-all elections in a fully polarized two-party system, it also harbors conflict and resentment between the parties. And it turns out, though, that this is not inevitable or normal. Most advanced democracies have multiple parties that are incentivized to work together when representing our interests in government. The electoral system that facilitates this is proportional representation. So, what is proportional representation and how does it lead to multi-party democracy? Proportional representation is the other primary type of electoral system alongside winner-take-all that's used by most of the world's democracies. Proportional representation, PR, distributes legislative seats to political parties in proportion to the amount of votes they receive in elections. So PR is the simple idea that a share of votes gets you a share of seats. So for example, if a political party earns 30% of the vote in an election using proportional representation, then they earn 30% of the seats in the legislature. The key mechanism that enables multi-party democracy is the usage of multi-member districts. The proportional system in this example uses three-member districts. So of the four parties that ran in the latest election, three of them earned enough votes to earn a seat. So there's representatives from the Green, Blue, or Democratic, and Red, and Republican parties serving this district in the larger legislature. A clear example of our winner-take-all elections restricting political representation can be found in Massachusetts' congressional delegation. So despite earning 30% of the vote in the last elections, Republicans have been completely shut out from representing their voters in Massachusetts. So while in some states, such a lopsided victory could be attributed to gerrymandering, which is, the drawing of district lines to give an advantage to one party over another, Massachusetts actually uses a politically independent body to redraw their district maps. So this case of one-party domination is purely a result of our winner-take-all elections. But what if Massachusetts used proportional representation to elect its 9 representatives? Instead of selecting representatives from 9 single-member districts with PR, the state could be divided into 3 multi-member districts, with each selecting 3 representatives. The short-run effect of this change is that 2 or 3 Massachusetts Republicans would be sent to Congress, but in the medium and long term, PR would foster a more competitive political climate for other parties to emerge as well. And that's why most large modern democracies left the unrepresentative single-member district system behind over the past couple centuries. And in its place, about 80% of the world's advanced democracies use some form of proportional representation. The reason most democracies have switched to PR is because when comparing it to winner-take-all elections, PR presents a range of benefits. Most of those benefits stem from the fact that proportional representation produces multi-party democracy. And to us, the benefits of multi-party democracy fall into 5 categories. It better represents our interests, it better reflects our diversity, it incentivizes collaboration and compromise among parties, and as a result of those 3, produce more responsive policies. And furthermore, in a country with PR, rather than an extremist faction being able to co-opt one of the major parties, they're marginalized and iced out from governing, as we recently saw in Germany's election. And don't take my word for it. As our democratic crisis worsens, momentum for proportional representation, it's growing fast. Political scientists, democracy scholars, and a new wave of electoral reform advocates are beginning to coalesce and raise awareness around what many see as the most promising solution to our significant, long-standing two-party political problems. Proportional representation is simply a better way of doing democracy. And that's why, at least according to the 2024 Economist Democracy Index, 13 out of 15 of the world's highest performing democracies use proportional representation to elect their legislatures. So, how can we catalyze the transition to robust multi-party democracy in the United States? To start, we got to consider the opportunities for reform available to us. So since PR strictly functions as a system for electing legislative bodies, it can't be used for executive offices like president, governor, or mayor, which are all single seat. So that leaves Congress, our 50 state legislatures, and local government elections as potential settings for adopting PR. Between those 3, there are more than 87,000 elections for us to consider, and that's a lot. So to narrow that list down, we need to clarify the goal we're seeking through electoral reform. And our goal at ProRep Coalition is multi-party democracy, which proportional representation produces. Since that's our goal, now let's ask which of these 3 different election settings are partisan? Well, most local government elections in the US are nonpartisan. And while PR certainly still provides some benefits, the problems facing local elections aren't partisan by nature. So the multi-party solution to our two-party polarization isn't totally relevant in most local elections, which leaves elections for our federal and state legislatures. At the federal level, I think it's probably safe to say that adopting PR in Congress is a lot of people's ultimate goal. It would be revolutionary. However, doing so requires repealing a 1967 law which codified the universal use of single-member districts for all U.S. House elections. Repealing that would require passage in both the House and Senate, which means that the route to reform runs through the very two-party gridlock it aims to reduce. It's a different story in the states, though. Of our 50 state legislatures, 26 have forms of direct democracy that allow citizens to enact or repeal laws without the support of the governor or legislature, including California. State legislatures are also partisan institutions, and unlike local elections wherein city council members and school board members are nonpartisan, every single one of the U.S. state legislatures is made up entirely of Republicans and Democrats. So between the 3 potential election settings that offer opportunities to adopt PR, as grassroots organizers with the goal of transitioning to a multi-party democracy, focusing on our state legislatures presents the most potential. So allow me to reintroduce ProRep Coalition. ProRep is a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. Okay, why California? A few reasons. First of all, it's our home. ProRep Coalition is a fully independent, California-based group of advocates that believes adopting PR in the Golden State will create a more democratic and representative government for Californians. On top of that, we're aware of the impact that California plays nationally. And as they say, as goes California, so goes the nation. Adopting PR here has the potential to catalyze a movement for PR across the US. Third, our state's got big problems. Perhaps no statistic better captures the failure of our government to respond to Californians' critical needs than the staggering economic inequality in our state. California has the fifth largest economy in the world. Its multiple industries bring in more revenue than most countries do. Yet 34% of California's households do not earn enough income to meet their basic needs. And such high rates of poverty in California are not only problematic, they're inexcusable. Literally, there's no excuse. We've experienced more than 60 years of a single party dominating our legislature. That means that the economic inequality we're experiencing, it can't be blamed on Republicans or the alternating power and gridlock between the two parties. One party has had full control. And it's not just economic inequality. There's also housing affordability, healthcare accessibility, climate change, forest fires. We've known about these problems for decades, and Democrats have had more than enough power to at least prevent them from getting worse, but they've failed. And this isn't lost on voters. 71% of Californians believe more political parties are needed. Fortunately, there is a route to reform that can make more parties a reality. We have a uniquely powerful ballot initiative in California. All we need to enact reform is more than 50% of the popular vote. And here's how we intend to make that happen. So ProRep's efforts rest on three strategic pillars. First, public education. Over the next few years, we're working to raise awareness of proportional representation and, in particular, the outcome of that reform, multi-party democracy. We're focusing on multi-party democracy because, frankly, most people aren't aware of electoral systems or electoral system design. And we can't blame them. It's complicated, it's far removed from most political conversations, and it is remarkably unsexy. So we want to meet people where they are. And where they are is dissatisfied with our politics and unhappy with our increasingly hostile two-party system. Our second strategic pillar is coalition building. We're providing the electoral reform vehicle that enables supporters of PR to travel together towards real change. So far, we've created the first formal multi-party coalition in the US in nearly 40 years, with a total of around 500,000 registered voters just among the ballot qualified parties in our coalition, including the Green Party of California. On top of that, we've recruited some of the leading electoral system design experts in the country and are working with notable political reform thought leaders like Protect Democracy, Fix Our House, and New America. Our last strategic pillar is direct democracy. In particular, the destination of our electoral reform vehicle is a 2028 ballot initiative, which will be spearheaded by a new 501c4 organization affiliated with ProRep Coalition. So, provided we effectively educate the public about the benefits and promise of multi-party democracy, build a robust coalition that participates in these efforts, and gather enough petition signatures and votes to pass the initiative, we fully anticipate that by 2030, California will become the first multi-party US state. And ideally, our success will help provide some sort of template for reform in other states, leading to a wave of proportional representation across the country. So since launching in 2023, we've recruited 17 parties and nonprofits as coalition members with no financial or institutional support. So what we're doing is working. 2 years ago, PR was considered a moonshot reform. Today, it's gathering grassroots momentum faster than any other reform in the country. That's partly because by forming a coalition, we're encouraging advocates to embody the values of PR and democracy into our work. We need to work together. This reform, it's too big and it's too consequential for any singular organization or party to champion alone. And at ProRep, we believe democratic reforms should be produced democratically. That's why we're entirely committed to forming deep and lasting relationships with our coalition members and constantly seeking their input to help shape our work. And while we remain largely focused on California, we found that our approach, creating an inclusive, broad coalition to advance electoral reform, it's not exclusive to California. And if any of the organizations or advocates joining today aren't in California, please reach out to me afterwards, and I'd be happy to do what I can to help you come up with a strategy to grow a statewide coalition of your own. Okay, wrapping up. As we all know, authoritarianism is on the rise globally. It's definitely on the rise in the United States, and Americans are losing faith in democracy. And despite clear signs, our polarization is only getting worse. We are still incredibly far from addressing its root cause, which is our outdated two-party system. Adopting PR and moving away from that two-party system would profoundly improve the political life, character, and broader democracy of our country in 50 states. And Americans have this extraordinary ability to cooperate and work together. But when our institutions are designed to divide us and pit us against each other, that's exactly what's going to happen. But we can do better. And by transitioning to a system that encourages multi-party representation, collaboration between leaders, and more responsive policies, we will do better. So that's the presentation. Happy to answer any questions after we hear from Lynn. So I'll pass it back to you, Jennifer. Jennifer, you're on mute.
Okay. You hear me now? Yes? Hopefully.
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay, good. Well, it was a great presentation, and I hope you get it before 2030, but I think you'll get it because I think the time is right. The people that are in power right now are just so, it's been such an oligarchy that these people are so out of touch, they don't even understand what they're doing is turning so many people out. It's just, it's so over the top that pretty much everybody is getting, I don't know what's it, but okay, stop now. But anyway, it's just gone so over the top that I think people are all going to be ready for something like this. And I mean, when you brought up 4 pillars, I had to kind of think about how the West Virginia governor, how he said that they have 4 pillars and they're their health care. And it was just a recent speech I heard from him. And I thought, oh, they're taking 4 pillars. They took our health care for all, and they took our living wage and the Green New Deal. They're always taking ideas from the Green Party and yet really not doing them. But there's just so much that people aren't being represented. Indigenous and, political parties that present a platform. You said Caledon, where some people go, oh, just be independent. Who needs parties? Here's about parties. Well, the thing is if you have an independent, they could be anywhere on the spectrum. You don't really know if they don't have a platform. This person you're voting in, who knows what they'll do? So with a party, they have a platform. You know where they're at. So I mean, it is very important to have. But I just say fight, and we will, prevail. I think this is the best method to go right now. We do have a corporate media. We have many people are commenting on, the military industrial complex. Yeah, we got all that. But again, at some point, people have just, like that one movie where I can't take it anymore. That's maybe how it will happen, I hope. So I just say fight for it. But, having participated in 2 Green Party national lobbies in DC for public funding only for all elections, Republicans are like, yeah, we love the money. And the Democrats are like, oh, yeah, we really don't want the money, but we have to fight the Republicans, so we need the money. And some of the Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida, they clearly told us at the DNC club off of the Capitol circle there, they were like, yeah, we like money too. So I mean, like many are saying, it is a duopoly. Okay, well, we have Lynn Serpy, who has worked on electoral campaigns for over 30 years in the US, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and she has worked as a senior advisor for Fair Vote and was the first deputy director of the political reform program for New America Foundation. She also served as a national single transferable voting, the STV, coordinator in New Zealand Parliament and ran 17 different referendum campaigns for in the country. And she was the Ohio recount manager in 2004 and also the recount manager in a few states in 2016. So she's done a lot of election reform. She wrote the roadmap of successful referendum campaign for RCV in New York City. So please, Lynn, thank you for coming and tell us how you can make this happen.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. I see a few people have their hands raised, and so the questions are going to be at the end of the presentations, just because I've seen people with their hand raised and then making waves. So I wanted to just mention that to everyone. And so thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Zaki and Caledon. I always learn something new when I participate in these panels, and the statistics that Zaki mentioned in Ferguson are really staggering. It really puts this into perspective, I think, for everyone. So I have been working on voting system reform since the late 90s. It's a long way coming. And I've had to go overseas to see some successes. So I spent a couple of years working for the New Zealand Greens in Parliament. And there are two different systems there that they use. One is the single transferable vote, which is essentially ranked choice voting in multi-member districts. And the other is MMP, which is the mixed member proportional system. And in that case, for MMP, the voter gets 2 votes, they get a party vote, and they get their normal constituency single member district vote. And the Greens got into the New Zealand Parliament based on their vote in MMP in the mid-90s. And one of the pieces of legislation that was put forward by the Green Party co-leader, Rod Donald, who had been the former head of the Electoral Reform Coalition, was an STV local options bill. So they allowed for voters in New Zealand to vote on STV, the single transferable vote, multi-member ranked choice voting, what in the US we call PRCV. And I ran 17 of those referendum campaigns. After that, I went to British Columbia, where they put STV on the ballot as well. But in British Columbia, STV was put on the ballot as a result of a citizens' assembly. They had people from all over British Columbia study election systems for a year, randomly selected individuals. It was almost like a jury kind of situation from all the districts throughout British Columbia. They studied different systems and they made a recommendation, and they said for their community, for their province, STV was the best choice. And so I went and helped on that referendum campaign because I'd had all the experience in New Zealand. And we got 58% of the vote, which was amazing, except the government had put in a 60% threshold for success. So we won, but we lost. And this was 2005, 20 years ago. And it's still one of the most heartbreaking campaigns I've ever worked on. There's been other campaigns I've worked on, the Ontario MMP campaign, the mixed member proportional one. I worked on the single member version of ranked choice voting in Oakland in 2006, and that did pass with 69%, and that was great. And when I worked for Fair Vote, they had me write the roadmap to ranked choice voting in New York City. And so over the years, in different countries and in different ballot initiatives, primarily, one of the options that Caledon mentioned is I've really learned a lot about what voters do and do not want in terms of the approach that we do for these campaigns themselves. And the biggest issue is, what problem are we trying to solve? Because in and of itself, if people don't think there's a problem, they are not going to want to change. You know, it's kind of like the law of physics and inertia. To make people change, it just requires this massive momentum. And so what they're really looking for is what we have to look for as campaigners is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And, you know, we heard tonight a lot of the problems. And as many of us are activists within the Green Party, we certainly feel that we know a lot of the problems. But when you take an issue to the ballot and you're trying to get the support from a majority or plurality, depending on the role in your jurisdiction, and you're trying to get that support from a wide range of people, it has to be a problem that a wide range of people think is a problem. And that's probably the biggest takeaway I have, is this idea of like better the devil you know. People really can be quite resistant to change, and they start applying a degree of scrutiny to the new system that they have never, ever applied to our current winner-take-all, first-past-the-post system. And so the no side, which is the status quo, they just have to find one issue and sort of hammer it home. They rely on fear-mongering, and it really can work. So for a campaigner, you have to think, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And so that means doing your research, right? So Caledon listed some discrepancies, some very clear discrepancies in terms of number of votes and representation. And pretty much any one of us in our municipal elections, in our state legislative elections, and certainly in national elections can see this sort of disproportionality. And so we can demonstrate a problem. So then we have to figure out, what is the solution? And so I already mentioned two different types of PR, the single transferable vote, STV, and MMP, mixed member proportional. And those do tend to be the types of reforms that are most discussed here in the United States. Well, I shouldn't say here in the United States. I'm actually in Canada right now because they have a snap election. The federal government decided to hold their election very early, mostly due to the threats of tariffs and the idea of becoming a 51st state. And so in Canada, they called what's a snap election, which is a 37-day election period. And there's an organization here called Fair Vote Canada that actually right now is trying to take advantage of this particular election to really focus on the need for voting system reform, because the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had said in the last election cycle that it would be the last election under first past the post, what we call winner take all. But then he went back on his campaign promise. So there is a very energized and active base of people here in Canada who are working every day to try to improve the voting system in Canada. And I do get inspired by them, as I was inspired in New Zealand and in Australia, where they use STV and get Greens elected, as well as other parties as well. So from a campaigner perspective, it's, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then, obviously, what are the benefits? But it's figuring out where you can win. And so I appreciate the approach that Caledon put forward, which is a long-term approach, building coalitions, putting together an education campaign, all of that. I have come over the years, and I've been at this since the 90s, to say, you know what? Toss it on the ballot, because you put it on the ballot, and then every voter in your district has to vote on it. And that means there's going to be voter guides. That means there's going to be newspaper articles. That means there's going to be blog posts. That means there's going to be maybe town halls and debates. There's going to be opportunities to educate people about the initiative. And, maybe you lose that first time. That's what happened in San Francisco back in the 90s when they first tried to put ranked choice voting on the ballot. But then they came back and they got it passed. And then after San Francisco had it, we got Berkeley, and then we got Oakland, and it really grew and grew and grew if we're talking about California. So I think I'm at the point in my political career that I am tired of the long game. I can appreciate it, and I love that it's happening. But if there is any takeaway from this, it's just that we don't have enough time for the long game. Most of us have seen in our lifetime this increasing partisanship, this increasing polarization that Caledon talked about. We've been hearing about the statistics that Zaki talked about, or living those experiences. And personally, I'm tired of waiting. So although state legislative might be the best opportunity, you can make change at the local level. A lot of the city councils, a lot of the local, school boards, park districts, whatever it might be, a lot of them have multi-member seats. They have, often it's referred to being at large. And so there are opportunities there for proportional representation. And it is a lot easier. You have fewer signatures to gather. You don't necessarily need as much money. And so, you do that. You start at the local level and you start throwing stuff on the ballot. And I know it sounds a little scattershot, but the reality is I've been doing this work for nearly 30 years, and there's only been a handful of ballot initiatives on proportional representation. There's been more for single member ranked choice voting. I think the idea in the beginning was we get single member ranked choice voting, and then we go after multi-member ranked choice voting, which is the proportional version later on. So when I got started in the mid 90s, I thought, oh yeah, this is a 40-year plan. It's been 30 years, and there's been very, very, very few places where PR has passed in those 30 years. So I definitely can appreciate what Caledon was saying about how things are gaining momentum, and I hope that's true. But I also heard this idea of this sort of slow but steady approach, and I'm tired of slow but steady. Our planet is burning. People are dealing with significant inequities. They are dying. And there is a solution, which is proportional representation. We know that solution is a proven, tested solution. And so for me, if people have any takeaway, is what can I do in my community to start talking about proportional representation and getting it on the ballot if you live in one of those places where that is possible. And for a lot of places and your local level, you might have a charter revision reform committee. There might be a charter revision commission that'll allow you to try to put something on the ballot, to gather signatures to put it on a ballot, to convince your local council to put it on the ballot. And I just want to encourage everyone to move it forward, because we don't have enough time, in my opinion, to keep waiting. And I'm speaking as someone who now has worked on dozens of election reform campaigns in multiple countries around the world. And some of them have failed, a lot of them have won. And so we know what it takes to win. You have to identify the problem, identify the solution, and you have to let the voters get involved and get educated because they want to vote on this initiative. And you use that as your building campaign, because that's what happens during a campaign. You get people who endorse, you get invited to go speak to an organization because they want to learn more. And so if you don't win that first time, you then use that experience, your donors, your volunteers, the media attention you had, the different organizations that you did reach out to, you continue to build those coalitions, just as Caledon was talking about, but it has a very clear goal and an end date in mind. It's very, very difficult to remain excited about reforms when you don't know what the end date is. You're working on something for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So one of the wonderful things about election campaigns, at least that I love, is at the end of the day, there is an election date. So you work really hard, you put your heart into it, and then there's election day, win or lose. And then a couple of days later, you have your debrief, what worked well, what didn't, and then you go back to the drawing board and you try again. But to sit back and wait, to me, is just we are running out of time. And I had a whole different presentation that I was planning on giving tonight, but listening to the two speakers before me, they really impressed upon me this need for urgency. So I can go into any detail about New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and even efforts in the United States during the Q&A period. I'm happy to do that. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to kind of cut out so we can move to that Q&A period, which Jennifer, I believe, will moderate. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. You're muted, Jennifer. And thanks to all of our presenters. That was really inspiring to me to hear the different perspectives. I'm going to add one thing sort of as MC's prerogative or whatever, but one of the things that wasn't talked about is running candidates. And there's no point in having proportional representation if we don't have strong parties and strong candidates running for office. And it also puts pressure when people start to lose elections because there's multiple candidates to make those changes. So I know it's not exactly on topic of how the system works, but it is on topic of what are we going to do to get to it. So I just want to make a pitch for everyone here to think about who their community leaders are and starting to talk them into running as either preferably, Green Party people, but in any way they can affect the system by being part of the campaigns that are coming up. So I don't know if Jennifer had anything else to say or if we should move right to the Q&A. Jennifer? And I think,
I got a couple comments. One of them
Yeah.
is that we're starting a conversation, and I think we should continue the conversation. And it's kind of hard to argue. I think the overreach that we're seeing right now with this administration, I think a lot of people are starting to get like, whoa, people are just losing their jobs. People are getting sent out of the country. I could lose my Social Security. People are getting really concerned with this overreach. And I think the egos just got out of control. And that is helpful to us in getting people to think out of the box instead of thinking like, well, it's always been that way and it always has to stay that way, because people are like, I don't want it to stay that way. So we're getting alliances from that, I would think. I mean, it's really hard to argue with and defend what's been going on. So I'm hoping all of you get out there, and all you activists get out there and start making a noise and start talking about proportional representation. And I really think it can happen. I mean, in Florida, for example, with the elections just that happened, yeah, they just went red in Florida. We didn't get any, not that I would be excited about that. I was getting, texts from these Democrats, and I'm like, no, not after what you did to us in the 2024 election. I'm never going to give you any donations ever again. There were times when I would help Democrats, but no more. And so I'm fully committed to just Greens only, and maybe socialists, something. But I mean, but the idea
right.
is that,
So
yeah. So anyway, I mean, it's just, you really have to like stand for this, because you did see in Wisconsin that the all the money that Elon Musk spent was rejected. So that's a good thing. Real quickly, here's some countries that don't have proportional representation, just to get people
Jennifer,
on the side.
Jennifer, I think we should move to questions. We have people that have had their hands up for like 20 minutes, and it was part of the slideshow as well.
China, Russia, India, most Middle Eastern countries in Eastern Europe, and the United States. So that's our comrades in not having. Okay.
All right. So I think that the easiest way is if people use the raise hand function, and we'll call on you. And if you don't see a raise hand function, it might be under react in your little control panel. So Elizabeth has had her hand up for quite a while. Elizabeth, go ahead and ask your question, but unmute first, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good. It was a wonderful presentation. Really, really wonderful. I have just a couple of things. One is that there is a group calling for open primaries. I think it's run by mainly libertarians, and California has open primaries, but there are some states that haven't. And so it seems to me that that group would be good to go with for the system. The other point is it was brought up about enlarging the House of Representatives. So if you would do that, you would eliminate the Senate, I assume. And the other question is, it seems to me, and I don't know if people think about it, that maybe we need a parliamentary system, because in a parliamentary system, there are more parties. And it seems to me that maybe this is what we're working toward. I don't know. That's a question. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take a take on the open primaries. I think you might be right that there's people interested in open primaries that would be interested in proportional representation, but the way it exists now, it just funnels more people into the two major parties that have primaries, because most minor parties don't have primaries. So I have actually been fighting open primaries in New Mexico. And about parliamentary system, Caledon, do you want to just talk about the relationship between ProRep and parliamentary as you see it, please?
Yeah, generally speaking, so you're right. Countries like Canada and the UK, they have slightly better of a two-party dominated legislatures than we do, in that there are occasionally third or fourth parties elected, but they are still two-party dominated. And I think the biggest difference in the flaws with each of our winner-take-all systems, and because parliamentary systems make it slightly easier for minor alternative parties to get elected, they still have highly disproportionate outcomes. And maybe Lynn can speak to this as well, because in Canada, and what Fair Vote Canada tends to really emphasize is the highly disproportionate election outcomes, where I think in some provinces like Ontario, the Conservative Party got maybe like 30 or 40% of the vote, but then went on to earn a majority of the seats. So parliamentary systems that still use winner-take-all elections, they still have a lot of problems. The problems just manifest in different ways than winner-take-all systems with presidential elections. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
So I do actually have a slightly different response, which is that, we, as Caledon mentioned, you can have proportional representation even here in the United States, which is not a parliamentary system. So the reason why people think of parliamentary systems as being sort of so successful is because they mostly have proportional representation. So as Caledon said, in Canada, they don't have proportional representation. They do have a history of sort of third and fourth parties getting elected, but it is dominated by those two parties. So the parliamentary system is not what gives you multi-party democracy. It's the voting system, which is what gives you voting, which gives you those diverse viewpoints around the legislative table. You don't need a parliamentary system to have PR. Just wanted to make sure that was really clear for everyone.
All right, let's move on to Justin Piglino, please.
Hello, thank you for those presentations. I had a question about the mechanism of PR that your organization would recommend, Caledon, because I suppose there are, a few different ways it could be structured. Like you didn't talk about what the ballot would look like. Like I understand in Australia, the lower house is elected a single member district, RCV, and the upper house, did I say Australia? In Australia, and the upper house is represented, the upper chamber is represented by multi-member districts, but they still use a ranked choice vote, preferential vote ballot. And a couple ways of doing that were mentioned, of doing PR were mentioned earlier, that and the, pick a party, pick a candidate. But I also wonder, would it work, or is it one of the ways of doing PR to just have everyone just vote for one person? You know what I mean? So like, you vote for pick one of these candidates, and, the seats are allocated proportionally. And I have to tag on one more part to my question. In multi-member district elections, the primaries, how many candidates would each party be allowed to have on the general election ballot, assuming they have, their own primaries in advance of the general election? So, because I've seen some forms of PR proposed where there might be 5-member districts. So, would a party complain, well, hey, our party, we 60% of the voters are registered with our parties. We should be allowed to have 3 candidates appear on the ballot in this multi-member district. So would there be limits on that? And yeah, I'm just wondering if you guys have a system that you're recommending already, kind of formulated, that you would want to put in front of the voters. Thank you.
Those are all very good questions. And I'm going to pull up a few more slides, because those questions are for PR 200 or PR 202. And we really did cover PR 101 in that first section. So generally speaking, and to your point, which we didn't cover this at all, proportional representation refers to a pretty overarching category of systems, which in it has multiple different forms. And generally speaking, ideally, an electoral system, it should be tailored to address the unique needs and preferences of the population that it's impacting. And when we're talking about the different forms of PR, we can put them into 4 different categories that, again, like you can tweak based off of district magnitude and electoral threshold to meet and to tailor to that population's needs and preferences. So those 4 types of PR, generally speaking, are single transferable vote, mixed member proportional, open list, and closed party list. Generally, you can kind of orient them as being more party oriented or more candidate oriented. So, for example, a ballot with single transferable vote, it's not going to necessarily have parties on it, but it's going to have candidates, and it's going to allow you to rank candidates in order of preference. So that's a more candidate oriented form of proportional representation. Open party list proportional representation is kind of right in between, where you're able to select from the list of potential candidates as well as their actual parties, and you might not necessarily even need to rank them. Also, somewhat in between the candidate and the party-centric models of PR is mixed member proportional. So you have 2 different votes that you're able to make. You have your district ballot where you're voting for one candidate that will represent the single member district that you're in. And then you're able to vote for one party that will represent you statewide. And then last, definitely the more party-centric version of PR where you don't get to select among candidates at all is closed party list proportional representation. And this is you just select the party and that's it. Where are we at ProRep Coalition? Look, the selection of an electoral system is one of the most consequential decisions for the political life of a state or a country. And I think it would be pretty crazy for us to say that we know what system is going to work best for California, a state of 40 million people. So one of the reasons why we're forming a coalition, in addition to gathering the support required to actually collect all the signatures needed to appear on a ballot in 2028. But one of the reasons why we're forming the coalition is because we're trying to facilitate a robust, deliberative democratic process that allows our coalition members and a broadly representative group of Californians to decide which of those 4 systems and how they're tailored, but which of them is going to work best for California. And as to how that affects primaries, that's partly dependent on the system that's selected. And at the moment, another really complicated detail to add into the mix is that when you're pursuing a state level ballot initiative to adopt proportional representation, there are a lot of restrictions that you need to work within. So in particular, the single subject rule. The single subject rule states that a single ballot initiative can only address one subject. So what that subject is highly up to interpretation. And we actually just partnered with Harvard's election law clinic to try to figure out what those parameters are that we need to work within when putting together a few different models of what the different forms of proportional representation could look like in California. So those are things that we're doing behind the scenes with a group of political scientists and academic experts that we've recruited into the coalition. But first and foremost is the public education side of it. And as I said, people don't know what proportional representation is. They know what ranked choice voting is, but ranked choice voting is a voting method. And if we want major, real political change, then we need an electoral reform that fundamentally changes our single member districts to multi-member districts, which is what you would get through proportional representation. And so educating the public of what PR is and how it leads to multi-party democracy is where we're at right now. And in terms of like getting concrete about what's going to appear in the ballot initiative, that's something that we're working on constantly. So I hope that answered your question. It was a long answer, but it's a good question.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you for your answer and thanks for your work. That's it for me.
All
Thanks.
right. Let's move on to Don next, please.
Okay. I wanted to ask about how proportional representation would affect gender biases and especially race biases, like Zaki was talking about. And proportional representation systems that I've seen in Europe, especially Spain, they're based on lists. Like in the United States, that would mean like the state had 10 House of Representatives people, each party would have a list of 10 people that it would run. And if a party had like 50% of the vote, it would get 5 out of its 10 people elected. And if a party had 10%, it would get 1 elected. So each party lists people from number 1 to number 10. And this would deal a lot with gender bias very quickly, because if a party had a woman for position 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 out of the 10 positions, it would be very clear that that party was dedicated to gender balance. Because if they got half the votes, they would get 3 women elected and 2 men elected. It also deals exactly with the issue that Zaki was talking about. How do you get proportional representation for people of color? It's like, say that 30% of that state was Black. Well, then the party that had no Black candidates on the list of 10 would obviously, Black people would realize it was a racist party and not concerned with them. If the Democrats, say 30% of the population was Black and the Democrats had 1 Black person on the ballot, that would mean that the Democratic Party would give lip service to racial equality, but not do anything. If, on the other hand, the Green Party had Black people in positions 1, 3, and 7, that would mean that the Green Party was highly dedicated to racial equality. And hopefully Black people would realize that if you want proportional representation for Black people, that you would need to vote for the Green Party because it had people on the list and that directly reflected the proportion of Black people in the state. And this means that basically what I'm saying is that if you had 10 people, 10 congressional districts in a state, you'd only have 1 then that would be the whole state, and each party would have 10 candidates. And so I'd like to know what people think about that, especially Zaki.
Well, Don, I think that's an excellent point that you made out, that you laid it out. And it just speaks to whether political parties are committed to racial inclusion as well as gender inclusion. And early on in my remarks, I was so proud of the Green Party of state of Missouri. And I had forgotten, I had one of these mental blunders for a second in terms of who was the presidential candidate at that time. In the year 2000, it was Ralph Nader, I believe a Lebanese American running as president. We had a Black sister named Evelyn Taylor running for a United States Senator. I was running for governor. And then you had a mixture of white males and females also running statewide. That was a real reflection of this country in terms of the racial and gender composition. And so if any political party is about the business of inclusion, then as you laid out, then that should be part of their agenda, making sure that their candidates reflect the racial and the gender composition of their party that would reflect the areas or the state that they represent. So I believe you just laid it out as it should be.
All right. And Lynn, did you have something to add about that?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that in New Zealand, where they have the mixed member system, so you elect your single member representative, and then you also have your party vote, where there's a list. So New Zealand, the New Zealand Greens as a party wanted to value diversity. So they basically said outright that in, like, say, their top 10, that you had to have gender balance, that you needed to have a certain number of Maori, which are the indigenous people in New Zealand. And you also had to have geographic distribution because they had a North Island and a South Island. And so very much parties, if you're in a partyless system, they have the opportunity to try to create as diverse a list of candidates as possible. Not all parties choose to do so. I do want to mention that with any partyless system, so it's open list, closed list, and MMP, it is a party-based system. One of the advantages, potentially, of STV, the single transferable vote, when you're able to rank candidates, it can be used in a partisan situation, so you're ranking candidates, across different parties, but it can also be used in a nonpartisan scenario, which we find more often in a local council. And the reason I mentioned that is because I was talking about what problem you're trying to solve. And so in a party-based system, a lot of the problem is about the disproportionate representation of political parties. But we have a lot of different types of disproportionate representation. I mean, Zaki highlighted one. As a woman, certainly gender is an issue that comes up to me. But, we're talking about youth. We're talking about Indigenous people. We're talking about the trans community. We're talking about LGBT community. There are a lot of different organizations, communities, constituencies, cultures, ethnicities, races that are not being represented. And so if we're solely looking at a party-based solution, like party list, then we're relying on the parties themselves. And so I happen to love STV because it is both proportional and preferential. And I think it provides that option for people at the local level all the way up to their state and national level. And it also allows you as the voter to decide which constituency, which viewpoint you want most to represent you. So I just wanted to make the pitch for STV. I mean, I absolutely hear what Don is saying. I just think that unfortunately it gives too much power still to the parties, and they may not put on the list the type of representation that we want. So I just wanted to toss that out there. Thank you.
And if I may, I just want to salute Lynn for the urgency of today. So the revolution is around the corner.
Right. Well, right. Yeah. Well, it's a 37-day election window here in Canada. So urgency is the name of the game, right? I mean, the writ was dropped. Election day is April 28th. And so we're full speed ahead. And in that process, lots of people are having lots of conversations about not just democratic reforms like proportional representation, but, parties. And they're talking a lot about strategic voting, which is what they call here, which, Caledon mentioned in his presentation, we refer to often as a spoiler effect. They just don't use that terminology here. So I think I am feeling a lot of urgency. Definitely.
All right. And Caledon did put in the chat a link for more information about this topic. And I'd like to go ahead and move on to Holly. And then Malik, we have you on deck, as they say in the sporting world. Holly, go ahead.
Thank you. This may or may not have been partially answered by one or more of you, but one of the differences in this country, besides having a lot of, well, depending on where you are, we have a lot of nonpartisan offices in my state. And ideally, you should know where they're running for, platform or party or not. But in this country, and I didn't realize this until recently, but we have a lot more down ticket and local offices and races, far more than a lot of countries with parliamentary systems and some countries that have what we would say ideally are better proportional representation systems in terms of government. But maybe there's more cohesion from top to bottom. But along with the issue of getting into the weeds of, now we have to add members for proportional representation, multi-member seat, multi-seat district. Has there been any thought given to a reduction? I don't know if this is my bias, I think it would be a horrible mistake. But has there been a concern raised about a potential reduction in the local races or local offices, or is this completely not even an issue with what you're talking about?
Anyone want to take that on?
Not an issue, probably.
I'm going to defer to Caledon on that one.
I'm sorry, I don't totally understand the question, Holly.
So you have your state government, California, you've got, legislature on down, then you've got your county level, you've got your supervisors, you've got your township trustees, city council, hospital trustees. Here we have Soil and Water Commission, Agriculture Commission, and so on and so forth. And that's a lot more in even smaller increments of government, which is much more local level, either the democracy or somebody in town has control of the whole show. My question is, do these systems tend to reduce, or has there been discussion on your end of a potential reduction in those kinds of offices? It sounds like that's not an issue. It sounds like that hasn't been an option, or you'd have an answer.
I guess what do you mean a reduction?
I mean, would this remove, or when you talk about, for instance, changing the makeup of your state legislature, single multi-seat, representation, would that have an effect on even further down ticket races, like county level, supervisor level, city?
Oh, I see. No, no, they're different election systems, and as I believe I mentioned in the presentation, the vast majority of local elections in California are nonpartisan. So the
Mhm.
main impact that adopting PR would have, if we adopted it at the state level in California state legislature, is that that level of election specifically would lend itself to multi-partisan representation. But those are local elections, city council, municipal are independent. So I think there would be some reverberating effects of some sort, but structurally, those elections would stay the same.
Okay, thank you.
If I
And
if I may just interject a subject that we're not discussing, but has total impact on the electoral process, and that's the obscene amount of dollars to be elected. And I know the Supreme Court had already ruled that it's okay to give whatever amount that people do give, but that also needs to be seriously addressed because many of the elections are just purchased by those who have the great amount of dollars. So that's a whole nother issue, but I just wanted to throw that out for future consideration.
so I want to piggyback on that because one of the advantages of a proportional system is that typically there's a threshold of support you need in order to get elected. So in the example that I think Don gave, that Caledon gave, it was sort of the idea of you're electing 10 people. And so, you need 9% plus one to win. And so if your goal is to get, say, 10% of the vote, you don't actually need to raise or spend the same amount of money as you would need to if your goal is to get a plurality or 50% plus one. So to some extent, proportional systems are almost de facto campaign finance reform solutions because candidates do not need the same number of votes to get elected because any proportional system, whether it's a 3-member seat, a 4-member seat, a 5-member seat, 10-member seat, etc., you're reducing the threshold to get elected. You're reducing the number of voters that you have to convince to vote for you. And in so doing, you don't have to raise as much money. And so what that also means is that those people who would not be able to raise enough money in a single member winner take all seat might have the opportunity to get elected under proportional representation. And so I think the issues are tied, and I'm really, really thankful for you to bring that issue up.
I want to piggyback off of the piggyback, if that's okay. So interestingly, and Lynn, maybe you can speak to this. So New Zealand is one of the only democracies to switch from a winner-take-all to a proportional system. And one of the first things that the alternative parties did once they got elected was implement campaign finance laws. So I forget what the exact figures were, but before PR was adopted in New Zealand, each party was spending, and this was in the early 1990s, each party was spending upwards of 20 or 30 million dollars on an election, which probably doesn't seem like much considering we just spent $1 billion in the US. But at the moment, and I just looked this up, after campaign finance regulations were put in place by the alternative parties, once they got elected, at the moment, a political party isn't allowed to spend more than $1,169,000 on any given election. So it's not a direct outcome of adopting PR, but by adopting PR, you're creating the opportunity for new and dynamic possibilities when it comes to other incredibly problematic issues with our elections, like campaign finance.
All right. Well, thank you. And we've advertised it as sort of ending around now, but we have Malik has a question still, and we probably, if some of the panelists can stay on, could take a couple more. But let's go ahead with Malik. Thanks for your patience.
Hello. I have a question.
Go for it.
I mean, what's the best way of actually resisting propaganda and how to disrupt it?
Are you talking about while we're running our proportional representation campaigns, kind of what was being talked about earlier, how first you have to explain what the problem is, and then everyone will say how it's not a problem?
Yes, exactly. I mean, what's the best way of resisting and how to disrupt propaganda? That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
All right.
basically.
Lynn, you're the campaign activist. You want to start us out with that one and see?
So it's an interesting question within this context, because I think that proportional representation itself is disrupting the system. It is a transformational reform. We are trying to literally break open the two-party system. And so depending on your analysis of the problems, and mine is that the two-party system itself is the problem. So inherently, efforts to break open the two-party system are disruptive. As far as propaganda, I mean, that is a very big topic, right? I mean, in terms, as far as like media access and things like that. And so one of the things in a lot of the countries that do have proportional representation, they do tend to have things like, a certain amount of free airtime for the different political parties, in order to put forward their information to the voters. That's something in Australia, they have mandatory voting. And so they need to have an informed electorate. So they make sure that parties have a certain amount of airtime. But I don't have a great answer from a political reform campaigner on things like voting system reform. I can give a side answer about one of the things we did in New Zealand, which was to kind of make it fun. And that is because, as some people, when you talk about STV and they look at the acronym STV, they think instead you're talking about STD, which is a sexually transmitted disease. So one of the things we did is we went onto college campuses and we had condoms that had been packaged, and instead it said STV, not a disease, but the cure. And then once we started having those 17 different referendums and we started winning some of them, we're like, STV, it's spreading. So we tried to take a play on it, just because for the attention that people might have on something that can be seen as somewhat arcane, like voting system reform. We wanted to make it fun, and we wanted to make it relevant, and we wanted to make it something that people would appreciate and talk about. So it's sort of like we created our own propaganda, but we did it in a way that today, in a social media world, we probably could have done an even better job. But I just sort of want to toss that out there because that's what came to mind when you asked the question. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to talk about anything differently.
Okay, that makes sense, I suppose. I'm still trying to understand it, though.
I'll jump in. So to kind of try to put your question into context, one of the most concerning things to happen over the last 2 months, in my eyes, it actually isn't from the Trump administration. It's from the social media giants. So right now, Twitter and Facebook, they just totally got rid of content moderation and identifying misinformation. So when it comes to raising awareness for electoral reform and a growing political movement online, that's not happening. It's people don't trust what they're reading online right now. And I think like that's actually somewhat of a good thing, because there is such broad awareness of the corruptibility of our social media platforms right now.
Yeah.
So how do we counter that? Honestly, in our view, right now, people don't trust politicians. They don't trust what they're reading on the internet. They don't trust nonprofits like us. People trust people. So the more that we can have people outside of myself sharing information about proportional representation and building support for it with their friends and family and their networks, that's how we could raise awareness for this thing for this campaign that will have a little more longevity and will allow us to sort of circumnavigate the growing cesspool that is the internet.
Okay, but one more question though. I mean, is there actually there's got to be another way to spread awareness without because you know what I mean, because people don't trust politicians that much. Heck, even I don't trust them that much myself.
Well, I think Caledon hit it on the head. It's people talking to people that is going to diffuse the power of the negative media. That's what I heard and I believe. So do we have any other questions, or should we wrap it up?
Well, I mean, what about programs for people with disabilities? Like, for example, because I was born with a disability, it's called autism, basically.
Okay. Well, we're talking about proportional representation systems and
Oh, sorry. I'm still like I said, I'm still new to these things. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure. I mean,
So yeah, this
what?
isn't a general discussion. It's a focused discussion. So
Yeah, I'm still working on it myself. Sorry.
all right. Well, we're
Well,
glad you're here, and I just want to thank everyone who showed up tonight and encourage you all, if you're not already, I recognize a lot of names, to stay involved with your local Green parties. And I think there's a lot of avenues to pursue proportional representation. And I sort of want to end with Lynn's urgency because I got involved shortly after her, and I only had a 20-year plan. She was already ahead of me in terms of what it was going to take. I was already impatient back then. Believe it or not, my 20-year plan didn't quite work out, but I'm still here fighting the good fight, and I'm glad to see all of you are too. I see a lot of names of people that I know have been around for years. So let's make this happen. Don, you want to give a plug for next month's Black Green Alliance presentation, and then we'll close it out after that.
Yeah, on May the 7th, we're going to have a program on the threat of charter schools and people all over the country. We know that there's a lot of privatization going on everywhere. They want to privatize Medicare. They want to privatize the post office. They want to privatize the national parks. And of course, charter schools are a way to privatize education, which should be a part of the commons. It should be something that everybody has a right to. So we're going to have people from around the country who are involved in different aspects of defending public education, speaking about what they've done, what's going on, how charter schools threaten the economy, threaten communities. And so May the 7th will be on May the 7th, and I really hope people can join us for that.
All right, and Joe kindly recorded this and put in the chat how you can review the recording. So thanks to everyone again, and have a good night.
The recording will go out, the link to the recording will go out to everyone who registered for the program. So the people who registered who are not here tonight, they will get a link so they can listen to it.